Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Conversation Hub from Culture Works Consortium. And it's my great pleasure to introduce yet again an old friend. He doesn't like the word old, but I embrace it. Mike O'Dell, welcome.
Thank you. Actually, it's the word friend that I object to rather than old, but
yeah, I have all the right people on here. Today, Mike and I are going to trot through the meadow of loveliness that is talking. From talking to doing, moving beyond strategy to results. We will be looking at this from I think, coaching, mentoring, and advisory perspective. And what is it that when you get to the stage where your business really is galloping along, what is the thing that you need to do most to engage outside advice or outside coaching or outside mentoring? So on that thought, Mike, I wonder if I could throw over to you. What is it that you've found is the best moment for a company to sort of, particularly a CEO perhaps, to call you in to do some coaching, and what type of coaching first lands, do you think?
Thank you. Right. I would say very early on, right? As soon as a business is starting to get any kind of traction, which one would hope is at the start, that's a great time to engage with a coach, and particularly for the CEO, because I mean it's a bit of an old trope, but it's a lonely old job when you're the person at the top, and having somebody you can trust in an environment where it is safe, basically, and you can share any worries, fears, concerns, or otherwise with somebody who's not going to be sharing it with anybody else is really useful. And I also think that, in fact, I've met a lot of people that I've wanted to work with because I felt they had a need, or indeed have worked with, who have been reluctant to engage with a coach at that kind of stage, simply because they think they're too busy to do it. And that's the time, because when people are super busy, sorting out, whether it be funding or sorting out the operational stuff or getting over the problems or gathering a team together or bonding that team, that's really a time to be taking that reflection space and not doing it by yourself, doing it with somebody who can be the sounding board and you can bounce stuff off. And what that means is you're talking through, as in this is the client, the CEO, let's say, right? He's talking through the issues that he or she are experiencing. And it's so much easier to clarify where one is at when you're talking to somebody, rather than just sitting there thinking about it while you're in the car or on the train or on the aeroplane or sat on your sofa having a glass of water or whatever it may be. And then the skilled coach or mentor can really help tease out the thinking and help people clarify where they're at. And what that means is that person can then actively choose the best pathway, because they've worked through various scenarios, options, and perhaps really importantly, thought about things from other people's point of view. Because often, especially when we're under pressure, we tend to think about ourselves, and which is fine, because that's the key bit. But if you're not thinking about who it is you're working with or interacting with and who else is on the chessboard at the time, you're potentially missing perspectives. And it's those perspectives that can really make the difference to a positive outcome or a less optimal outcome.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've got it just reminded me that we have a CEO MD retreat during November 20th to the 23rd, 21st to 23rd, sorry. And what that does is an opportunity for people to reflect and to gather in a confidential environment thoughts and ideas from others. And what it is that always seems so precious when you're talking to leaders is what you encapsulated, I think, in terms of, you talked about reflective and to tease out in terms of your response there as part of it. And it's time. And you can't buy it. These hackneyed phrases, you can't buy more time, But what you can do is use your time more effectively. And I think you point towards a challenge when companies are growing very fast and they're moving from designing a strategy, planning out that strategy, then looking at results and refining and reprioritizing, is actually time in the muck and bullets and rushing around fixing the urgent, the Johari window, as we call it, or is not often as useful as the leader taking time out to reflect upon where they are, to remove themselves from the immediate firewall of activity, take a step back and really, and I think a coach can do wonders in that area, can allow the person to clear their mind of some of the urgent, almost peripheral noise, and just allow an individual CEO, MD, to sit down and reflect upon where they are. And that beautiful phrase you use, and to tease out what's actually, we were talking just before it started about a conversation I'd had, and this morning, in fact, and how that was about this CEO starting to tease out his need and starting to tease out what are the real issues that the individual faced. As we discussed, maybe not the ideal moment in time. He was driving, I wasn't. I was preparing to come on this with you. But the point is, that time is precious because it gives someone an opportunity to really tease out their own thoughts. And, I mean, you also mentioned about being on the chessboard. That's that's a great phrase. And I just, my King to Prawn 3 or whatever it is I'm meant to be doing, was that a sandwich? I've forgotten. It's sort of, I'll go into that a little bit more and talk a little bit more about what you mean by on the chessboard.
Yeah, it's you're making me giggle now with King to Prawn 3. So I mean, it's an analogy I use every now and again. But I mean, chess is a really complicated game. It's not one of the best games because it is pretty complicated, and there are lots and lots of things that are moving there, and things that when one's playing the game, you have to be conscious of and thinking ahead on. And there's a combination of what your own strategy is, your own skill in playing stuff. So that's stuff you've already got. But it's also understanding what the other person engaged in the game is up to as well. So what is he or she doing? And how will I counter that and take it to my best advantage? And then in terms of the types of pieces you have on the board, there's different types of pieces, and they can do different things. So relating that to the business scenario, it's business is really complex. Whether it's a little starting up business that's got all kinds of complexities, a load of that is emotional complexity. The fervor of the people that have joined the business, the excitement, the energy they bring to it, but the worries and concerns and potentially lesser skills they might have in that early phase kind of stuff. And then how as the leader, founder, CEO of that, you enable the people to get the best out of themselves. Or if you go to sort of medium-sized and big businesses, again, it's even more complex. So there's way more moving parts and options and games and stratagems that are on the go, and it's being aware of them. And I guess trying to do another chess analogy, right? It's not getting swallowed up by there's so many options. One could confuse oneself, which isn't good, because then you can't see the wood for the trees, and then you've got a different kind of issue. So it's being able to lift oneself up and basically tease out and judge what the important stuff is. And again, doing that hook back to the coach, mentor, advisor kind of relationship we're talking about here, that you're taking your strategy and taking it forward to results. That's how it's so useful that you've got that person you can be talking with. And if I think back to the days when I used to work in companies, I certainly got so busy on stuff, and I was so consumed with how important whatever the nitty gritty was. I really, looking back on it, I think, oh, crumbs. I could have done better there, and maybe I would have done if I'd have taken the opportunity to find somebody I could talk to it about. And then they needn't have necessarily said anything or done anything. It's just the action of having that conversation and someone's properly listening and engaging and nodding. You then start to get the clarity yourself, and you think, why am I sweating about that? It isn't really that important, because what I'm trying to do is X. Yeah, and X is the important thing, and most other stuff is peripheral to that. So what do I then do? That are my in-game strategies that are going to drive us towards X most effectively. So that's a slightly cultured chess story, but that's how I play that.
I think there's another good thing that a coach can provide in terms of the chess analogy, and we've often discussed this, and that is that one, they can take you above the board, so they can give you some perspective by taking you above the board and looking down. The next thing is that, and we often hear this about grandmasters, is they're not playing the move, they're playing. If you think a grandmaster is playing the move they're playing, you're wrong. Grandmasters have a game in their head, and they are thinking sometimes many, many moves ahead. So in other words, they have the end in mind. And I think that the great advantage a coach has is to bring the individual leader back to, what is the end in mind that you have? What is it that you're doing today that's driving the value to get to the end in mind? And that reflective time to really be able to order and prioritize what you're doing creates the time to allow the person to be more effective, a better leader. And also in that time, and we can go on and talk about this, I think you touched on a little bit there, is when is there a need for mentorship? And when is there a need for coaching? And we can come on to advisory later on. Do you have as we talk through, have you had a reflection on that? Or
because I do quite frequently. So if you talk about my preferred style is to do the slightly purist coaching stuff, which is basically one is there as a facilitator, sounding board for the client, and you're not offering anything to them other than helping them think through whatever the issue is. And that is, if you look at the sort of major accrediting bodies like the ICF and EMCC, that is the purest style that they espouse. It's good. It's really good. However, as a former businessman, I do, and I suppose as a current businessman, because I've got my own little business, actually, sometimes you don't know. And you can talk about coactive principles and everyone's whole and resourceful and can work it out. Well, if you don't know, you don't know. And we don't know everything. So sometimes there is definitely a benefit in offering an alternate view. Now, you don't need to, in fact, I would definitely advocate you should never say you must do that, because that's a wrong thing, because you can misadvise, you may understand the context, and people don't really own the issue if they think they're being told to do something. But there is nothing wrong, and there is higher value, I believe, in offering, for example, a parallel story. So you might have been personally in a similar situation. You might have experienced a similar situation. You might know people who've been in similar situations. And if you can tell that parallel story, the client can then think, oh, I just didn't think of that. I didn't think of it because I didn't know it, right? And then that sets them off on a whole new train of thought resource, ideas resource, which can be explored, and they can work out their best pathway. So I think mentorship in the context of relationship, particularly with a CEO or leader, can be really powerful and valuable for that person and their business, because it is opening avenues to them. And there's been examples in the past where I've had a pure coaching relationship where I've basically sought permission from the client to offer that kind of parallel story. So, and if nobody's ever said, no, thank you, I don't want to hear it, right? But if you genuinely offered, and people accept it, and then my clients have said, oh, that's really useful, because they were just in that narrow path. They had no idea about other ways of doing stuff, or often about other perspectives, because because they're so into it, they might be so concerned about it that they've got this kind of mono view. That's what the problem is. And then they can come outside of that and start thinking about, well, from, let's say it's a CEO, CFO argument about something. Oh, that's what he or she might be coming. That's what they might be worried about. They might be worried about a turf war or something. Yeah. And that can then shift the paradigm for the client, who then can elevate themselves above the chessboard and work out for themselves the best tactics. And I'm not going to talk about a revised strategy, the best tactics to achieve whatever the strategy is they've got.
You broached into a very interesting part of coaching and mentoring there, and that is contracting. We all contract, and it's very important that you understand what the boundaries of the contract are. And it, in my experience, is the same as yours. I'm probably a little bit more mentory and not a pure coach, which is why I'm EMCC approved, probably more than ICF. ICF take quite a negative position on mentoring, I think. But the point is this: what you're saying is, when someone is asking you for advice, is it mentoring? Are they asking you to give them a story, an experience, a real life engagement process that actually helps them to reach a decision? Not tells them what the decision is, but helps them to think through and gives them perspectives that they didn't previously have. And that's why I always call it a coachy mentoring conversation, because it is about perspectives. It's not about making the decision for them. I 100% agree with you. And I think that is often, as we talk about, as we go from strategy into results, it's often, are you keeping those perspectives in mind as you're driving towards your end goal, your strategy? And in delivering perspective through story engagement, through the coach mentor, then I think that's a very positive approach. I think you make another good important point, and I certainly try not to stray into this area, and that is being an advisor, telling people what it is they should do. That's advisory. And in my experience, one, you're not insured, which is an important point to make for coaches who are thinking about doing advisory. Secondly, often you have to prove that you have. It's not about what you've done yourself. It's about, can you take a whole market view, and are you really the right person to do that? And I think often bad coaches and mentors can get into talking to people about advising them about their business and what they should be doing, because they think they have a handle on it. And I think that just diminishes and removes from the coaching mentoring role that we're talking about, which is actually, at the end of the day, that which is most valued. Because once a person has a good coach, once they have a good coach mentor, then that is a real touch point for them. It's like a lightning rod. They can go there and they can empty their emotional, as well as their confusion, as well as their conflicts into that situation, and have a really good conversation that again allows them to untangle. And you used a lovely phrase. You talked about it's an unburdening time. And I always like to think about a knot of, as you know, I share with my cousin a love of fishing. And whenever you look at a bird's nest, which is something we call a whole pile of line that's got wrapped up in itself, it's all annoying that the person you're fishing with can often see a way of undoing it, which you were just getting frustrated with. and you can do the same for them. But when it comes to your own bird's nest, as we call them, it's just, so I think that's again where coaching can play a fantastic role in just giving, it's someone else who can hold a few strands of your knot and just let you focus in on one area and pull you back constantly to that area that you're wanting to be coached around. I think that's a really, really strong value that people miss.
Yeah. I mean, if I can throw in another example to endorse what you're saying there. I mean, so I recently did another diploma in coaching. This was coaching supervision. And for those that don't know, I mean, so coaching supervision is basically when, in crude terms, you coach a coach. And it's great. I mean, I really enjoy it. It's good. And also within the kind of boundaries of how it works in the world of the esoteric world of coaching, right? You're allowed to be a bit more freeform in offering stuff. So that's me just setting the foundation. As I was doing that diploma, I was doing a practice session with one of my fellow cohort members, and she had quite a knotty problem. The one, as you described, with all, everything was really tangled up for her. And she was is a highly resourceful woman, same kind of degree of maturity as me. So she's got a lot of life experience, knows a lot of stuff, but she was really blocked in her tangled up fishing line. And then she'd gone through all of the stuff that was troubling her. And so I was thinking, okay, I get it. But I see it from a different angle. I was looking at threads that I thought could be untangled. So she finished, and then I said, would you be interested in an alternate perspective? And she said, yeah, I'd love to hear it. And I shared that with her. And it was like, the blindfold came off her, and she said, oh, I'd never thought of it that way. And then suddenly, because she had that completely different angle, which is the one that I'd seen and offered to her, she did then unravel her issue and then could recalibrate it. And what was a horribly tangled web of fishing line became significantly less tangled. I don't know if it became totally untangled, but certainly, she could continue fishing. So, so that is the real beauty and benefit of finding the right kind of person to coach / mentor, right? Who can just help individuals navigate scenarios.
I can only add to that with a very quick story. Over the weekend, I was in Portugal last week, and at the end of last week, someone emailed me and said, such and such has got in touch. I've been talking to such and such, and they recommended that I talk to you about this business problem. And the way they originally wrote the email, it sounds like it was talking about someone else. And when we actually spoke on Sunday, just before my daughter's netball game, it turned out to be about him and the problem he had with a client. And what you've just said, all I did was, I did a little bit of pushing and a little bit of probing that was not pure coaching, but started to untangle or get to what was the nub of the problem. And really all I did was to say to him, right, we've gone through all that. Put yourself in their position. How does that make, and he has a problem touching his emotions. That's part of his challenge. How would it make you feel if you were on the other side looking at you? And I just held the ball of the knot and just let him and watching the light bulb. He's written some very effusive. It's on LinkedIn. A very nice recommendation for me. But for me, the value is that he has a significant client for him, and it's a significant client for most people who now thinks they're back to where they were. Their relationship is renewed, their relationship is stronger, and their relationship is more productive. Well, that's just a coaching intervention. It's not magic. It's not, maybe what we do is magic. Maybe you ought to wear magic hats and come on here with sort of wands. But I can't overemphasize enough to people who are thinking about coaching or thinking about coach mentoring for their business, and they say, but I don't have time for that. Actually, think very carefully about the time you waste on unproductive thought and unproductive concerns and unproductive worry, because you could take 1/10 of that time, give it to a good coach, and they would find themselves being able to help you and speed up and improve your productivity and drive growth.
Yeah, I mean, can I just chip in on that one? So I approached a former client 6 weeks ago, basically saying, could you provide me any kind of intros to anybody in your network? Because I was punting for a bit of business. And she said, yeah, no, they're all really in the weeds at the moment, and they're budget constrained, blah, blah, blah. And so I said, oh, thanks. I said, that's actually the time they need someone like me, because they're in the weeds and they don't really want to be in the weeds if they're senior. And they're budget constrained. Well, actually, they want to find a way to not be budget constrained. Now's the time to invest a modest amount of cash in somebody like me. And I think that's a key thing. And I mean, I've encountered that so many times when I was in the world of HR, with everyone thinking they're too busy to invest in people. Wrong. And equally, with not investing time or a modest fee in a coach. I really don't think that's a good decision. Find the right person, spend the time, and to your point, we can't get more time. There's only 24 hours in a day, but we can use what we've got way more effectively. And coaching, mentoring is a means of doing that for people in business and also other stuff. I mean, there's coaches that specialize in things that aren't business things. Yeah. It's highly valuable.
Yeah, I mean, you reminded me of this email that I've now pulled up, so I can just. Hi, Michael. Thanks for the reminder. X is in the middle of multiple acquisitions alongside some significant leadership challenges and changes, all of which is fully occupying the management and shareholders at present. Hence, not the right time for this at the moment.
Classic, yeah.
And you and I sit there. We're both similar aged. We both work for large, American and UK FTSE and Nasdaq, and in my case, what is it? The American Standard and Poor's. Big companies, billions and billions and billions of value.
Yeah.
And the number of times I've heard people say, don't interrupt me, I'm too busy to do that. And and you remind them of the woodsman hacking down trees with a blunt axe. And it's quite remarkable that even, and this guy who I'm talking, whose email I've just read, is a pretty seasoned individual. This is not someone who is by anybody's description stupid, and not by anybody's description inexperienced. And yet still that we don't have time to do that. We're busy. The very things he put in the email. Well, yeah, that's forget me. Don't hire me. Hire somebody else. That's fine. Yeah. But that's when you need a coach, is when you have those challenges, acquisitions, management changes, team changes, and that sort of brings me, as we come towards the end. We talked about the GC index and team coaching, and what does it actually mean, and how can it deliver? I mean, that's a classic example, I think, of needing team coaching. Yeah. What is your experience of that too?
Yeah, I'm just going to be an echo chamber for you there. I mean, it's so important, because if you're talking about executing on a strategy, right? So let's assume the strategy is well defined, and if it's not, then you need to work on it. But let's assume it's well defined. Unless you've got a team of executives who buy it, into it, understand it, and actively want to execute it, it's going to be very difficult to make it succeed. And again, I've seen, because I've been in teams like that, which are broadly quite dysfunctional, mostly because everyone's got their own little agenda and they're playing their own games, and they've got their own turf wars and jealousies and concerns, blah, blah, blah. Team coaching, right, is massively powerful, right? And when that's allied with, individual coaching, because everyone's got their own stuff that they want to keep to themselves and need to work through, right? But when the team understands its dynamic and how it can be at its best and most effective, that is one of the best ways of actually executing a strategy which delivers the results that you want. And so many businesses don't get it. Yeah. The smart thing is for people like you and me is to package it in such a way that, you know, it doesn't feel like a huge time drain to them, right? And there is the big benefit. But if you align yourselves as a group of 4, 8, 15, whatever the size of the team is, together, and you are genuinely aligned and driving towards that strategy, that's the way to do it, because then it all goes ching, 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 and it happens. And then you're just dealing with, you know, the bumps in the road that are, you know, market hassles or, you know, whatever's going on, as a matter of course, rather than fighting the internal dynamics.
Well, on those fantastic points, Mike, we've come towards the end of our half hour. Thank you again for being on board, for highlighting the benefits of both individual and team coaching. We ought to give a little shout out to GC Index, which you and I both use as a tool within that coaching capability. And to leave you with one thought, remember that coaches are the best coaches are often people who've been there and done it and have the experience. And therefore, we understand dynamic pricing. So when you start using a coach, you can talk about a budget. As you grow as a business, don't expect that budget not to change. And I think that, you know, as a coach brings you more success, so you'll feel more, hopefully, towards the fact that you can compensate them appropriately as well. On that note, Michael, thank you. A great half hour, and see you again soon, we hope.
Indeed. And thanks for having me on again. I enjoyed it.
Cheers.